Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the WGSN-DB Going Solo Network's Going Solo Veterans Corner. I am your host, retired Army First Sergeant Paul Holbert from Northern Virginia. And for those of you that have seen the show before, you know our show is designed to bring veterans on and showcase their careers, their experiences, and what they're doing in their communities today. So I want to thank you for joining us this evening. Before we get started, though, I do want to take a moment to thank our two wonderful sponsors, Quest Jewelers of Merrifield, Virginia. Whether it's a quality jewelry or a special custom-made piece that you want for that special someone, I invite you to visit questjewelers.com and contact Pete and Wantain, the owners, and they will surely help you find exactly what it is you're looking for. I also want to thank Nationwide IT Services of Fairfax, Virginia. NIS is a service-disabled, veteran-owned small business, and if your company is in need of business support, training, IT, development, or whatever you need for your company, contact CK Park and his professional crew at Nationwide IT Services, and they will be more than welcome to help you. So again, thank you to our two wonderful sponsors who sponsor our veterans program. So let's meet tonight's guest, retired Air Force Chief Master Sergeant Victor Allen. Vic enlisted in the Air Force after graduating from high school in 1981 and started his career as an aircraft armament systems specialist. He finally retired in 2011, and we'll talk about that in a minute, at his final assignment as a career enlisted aviator field manager for the headquarters of the U.S. Air Force. Vic has a master's in aeronautical science and a bachelor of science in professional aeronautics and safety from Embry-Riddle. He lives in Northern Virginia with his family and has two grown children. So, Vic, thank you and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Paul. I appreciate you having me on. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I'm glad, really glad to have you. And first, though, I got to ask you, Vic, looking at your bio, I mean, come on, guy, you spent 30 years in the Air Force. You must have liked it.
Oh, I loved it. I really did. Especially after I became a flyer. It was one of the best jobs I think I ever had in the service,
Yeah.
And it was, I guess the higher you get, you realize that you can make some differences. You have some influences, but it was fun. And if they'd allowed me to stay another 10 years, I would have done it,
Oh, Lord. Well, I was going to say, when I looked at that and saw that you entered the Air Force about the same time that I joined the Army.
Mm-hmm.
But, you retired about 9 years after I did.
Oh, yeah.
I spent about 21 years. And I looked at that and I said, 30 years. I said, Vic, what'd they have to do, man? Push you out the door?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. Top cap, 30 years, they give you a waiver, I think it's year to year or something like that, at least back then when I was in. So I wasn't going to try to do that. It was time to go, but it was a good time. I had a fun time.
Well, and yeah, trust me, nothing wrong with that. I mean, it's evident that you really enjoyed what you were doing and enjoyed your military career. And, that's what it's all about. I mean, if you're enjoying what you're doing, why not stay until it's time to go, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I started out as an aircraft armament specialist on F-15s. Went to my first assignment, which was out in Holloman Air Force Base, and I was only there about a year and a half before I got shipped overseas to Kadena, and on F-15s again, just newer models, C&D models, and we were overseas. I had gotten married. My wife and I were over there for almost 7 years. Before we came back to the States. And as a maintainer, I think my favorite job as an aircraft maintainer was when I went out to Edwards Air Force Base, which is a Air Force flight test center. And I got to work everything from F-15s, F-16s, even some of the older model, F-4s,
Wow.
A-37s. Most of those were over at the test pilot school. And I was on a myriad of different programs and projects. But we were only there at Edwards for about 2 years before I went back overseas to the United Kingdom. And I worked, basically A-10s. That was the only aircraft I didn't get to work, there at Edwards, and worked A-10s for a few years before the mission changed, and they were moving the A-10s out, supposedly retiring them, but they never did.
Yeah.
But a special operations unit from up the road at Bentwaters, Woodbridge, was moving down to Alconbury. So I went on an assignment for a year up to Bentwaters or Woodbridge, to work on those aircraft and get indoctrinated into that program. And got as part of that indoctrination, they gave me a helicopter ride, just so we could see who we were supporting. And that was it. I was hooked after
you were
that.
Hooked, right?
Yeah. So retrained shortly after we moved down to Alconbury to become an aerial gunner. And that's where my career, diverged into something different. It was absolutely the best job I ever had, and some of the best and craziest, but the most bravest, I'd say the bravest guys I've ever had the opportunity to to work with, both in terms of the air crew and then our customers who were normally special operations forces, Army SF, Navy SEALs, and then some of our coalition partners, their special forces. And but it was absolutely a fun job. Never a dull day at the office, So
well, I want to backtrack just a second, because you were talking about the A-10s, and for those in the audience, the A-10 Warthog, they call them. Yep. And you're right. They were talking about retiring those things for years.
Yep.
But I mean, one of the most durable, armored, and armed aircraft that you would ever want to see. And I got to tell you, man, and I'm sure you did too, I had so much respect for those things and the pilots, because when I was in the desert with 2nd Armored Cav for Desert Storm, those things saved our bacon a number of times. There was nothing more wonderful than seeing an A-10 come up from behind you as you were moving forward and facing our rank. Those airplanes were incredible.
Oh yeah, they were, and didn't have to hit you. You just hear that gun go off once.
Oh gosh,
it'll put the fear of God in you. But it was actually my boss when I was at the Pentagon, my 2-star. There, he was an A-10 driver, so we got along really well, on staff up there, and he was a great individual. He actually came to work for the FAA for a few years before he moved on, but great opportunity, to hang out with him and talk about our time in the service. So it was good. Mm-hmm.
Well, let me ask you this. I mean, it's evident that, you loved your career in the Air Force and you spent all those years. But I want to ask you, though, how did you get in? What prompted you to go in the first place? And because I'm sure I would be surprised if you say, yeah, I joined and decided I was going to spend 30 years in before I got out. So how did you get in?
Well, I grew up in a little rural town, Wilson, North Carolina, right off of I-95 there when you're heading south. My great uncle, my grandfather's youngest brother, my Uncle Jimmy, lived here in DC. So I used to come up here, to DC to stay with him, sometimes during the summer, or he'd come down and visit us, during the summer. And he was kind of like, he was young enough, where I could relate to him. He knew what we were doing, when we were lying to my grandmother. He's like, I know what those kids out there doing, but he was old enough to give me advice. And he told me when I was probably 10 or 11 years old, he said, when you get old enough, man, you need to leave. You need to leave this town. You need to go see something different.
Yeah.
And I never forgot that, all the way up through, my years in high school. And it wasn't until I was when I was in the 10th grade that I realized, after taking economics, that we were poor, but I never felt that. I thought we were middle class. I'm thinking to myself, hey, we're middle class. And then I'm doing the math and I'm like, wait a minute, we don't have the means. But my grandparents, who raised most of their, all of their children's children, my grandparents never made me feel as if we were. I always had hot meals. I didn't always have the newest clothes, but I always had clean and serviceable clothes. But when I was in the 10th grade, I realized that I didn't want to be a burden after I got out of high school. And so I'd actually gone down to recruiter to see the Marine Corps and the Marine recruiter. I played football, basketball, ran track in high school. So, I wanted to do something that was, I didn't know what I was really wanting to do, but those guys, I always saw them on the commercials for them and everything. So I went down to see the Marine Corps recruiter, and he was out of town on a recruiting trip. I found out later, but I went back probably 3 times. And the third time he was out on a recruit, doing some recruiting within the city or in the town there. And I sat there to wait for him. And I probably sat there maybe an hour before the Air Force recruiter kind of stuck his head outside, his office. Like, hey, why don't you come in and let's talk, while you waiting, So I sat in there and talked to him for a good little while. And he pulled my ASVABs and he's, you qualify for the Air Force, too, right? And I was like, I didn't know what. I took the ASVAB just to get out of class, right?
Yeah.
So, we sat there and talked, and he called me up a couple of times. I went back down to the recruiting station, and before you knew it, I had committed to going to the Air Force, and that's how how I got in. I told my mom I just needed. I didn't want to be a burden to her and my grandfather any longer. And I wanted to get out and kind of forge my own way. My grandmother didn't really know, other than they always thought I was going to war. And I was like, well, Mom, that's not, we're not at war,
Yeah.
And, but I just told her I wanted to do something different. And so she blessed it and allowed me to go. And, it was originally going to be one tour and then I was done. Yeah. So
you just never know when you get in, because I went in not knowing, and didn't know how long I was going to be in. But I just wanted to point out something to our folks that are listening. This is your story is another prime example of how a young person can see something for their future, and how you're an example of how a young person got their start in the military and helped make them a success.
Oh, yes, sir. I still think that, to this day, I tell my 2 kids, I have a 30-something son, year-old son, he was 12 years older than his sister.
Yeah.
My daughter just graduated college. And this, a few weeks ago. So, but I tell them all the time that, the service, and service itself changed me as an individual. I had, I kind of thought that I was being patriotic, but I wasn't really sure that I was being patriotic.
Yeah.
But as you get, you get wiser in this, in the military. The Air Force did a lot for me, sent me off to schools, allowed me to, supervise people, and then when I started flying, I'm like, wow, I can really feel what it is that I'm doing. I can touch what I'm doing that's making a difference.
Yeah.
And it gave me a sense of worth and self that was bigger than anything I could have ever imagined. And yeah, it changed me, and molded me into the individual I am today. Honestly, I saw the world in a different, from a different vantage point, I should say.
Yeah.
Just made it so much better.
Well, so you were talking about, I kind of had to regress a little bit to tell us the story of how you came in, but I heard you say that once you were flying in helicopters, you were hooked.
Oh yeah.
Well, then I know you became an aerial gunner on Payload and
Yep.
A number of other things. And as you were traveling around with the Air Force, I looked and saw, my goodness, you had a number of tours in a lot of places, the Balkans, all over Europe. Tell us a little bit about some of those, some of the other places you went.
Started, my career, back when we were, over in the Balkans, and back during that war, got to see a lot of things firsthand, taking our Allied commander, into Sarajevo, as a Supreme Allied commander, the 130s were trying to get him in, couldn't get him in, so they bring him back to Split, and because the weather was so bad, true story, we're flying him into Sarajevo. And we had this system on our aircraft, which would basically fly us to zeros to anywhere on the earth. So we basically picked the intersections of this airport, to land to, and engaged our what we had was a hover coupler that would drive us down, to where we would be about 10 feet and about 10 knots, and drive us to this basically point, on the map. And we thought that our hover coupler had been engaged. Personally, I don't think it was. So when we were flying down to this point, I don't think anybody was actually flying the aircraft. They thought that the hover coupler was engaged, and I don't think it was, because even though I couldn't see the ground at the time, or none of us could see the ground, I could feel that we were drifting, and I could feel that we were drifting pretty fast.
Yeah.
And it started out as a chorus of, you're drifting, you're drifting left, stop left, slow your airspeed, and it was just all calm voices to about 30 seconds later where everybody's screaming. And the Supreme Allied Commander at the time was sitting in the back, and it's freezing cold. He had had taken off his jacket, had his sleeves rolled up, and he was ready for the photo op. We landed the thing safely, after screaming at the pilots to take the big sticks. We landed, and we were all like, oh man, we almost balled this bad boy up. Well, the commander comes up to me, and he just pats me on the shoulder, and he looks at me, and he said, "I want you to tell your crew, you guys are a bunch of hot cowboys," and we're like, he has no idea that we almost killed him and ourselves, going in there. And I relayed to the crew, and they were like, "Yeah, that's great," But it was stuff like that made the job, what it was. It was, we scared a mess out of ourselves, go have a drink, and then get up the next day.
You're ready to do it again, right?
Exactly.
And you know what? You're right, because I think you're right. That is part of the job. So Vic, we're gonna take a short break here real quick. And for the audience out here, we're going to take a break for a word from our sponsors, and we'll be right back to continue our conversation with Vic. So hold on, and we'll be right back. All right, welcome back, everyone, and you're listening to the Veterans Corner on the WGSN-DB Going Solo Network, and we are talking tonight with our guest, retired Air Force Chief Master Sergeant Victor Allen. So, Vic, you know, we were talking before the break, about some of the experiences you had, and you're right. You know, you get you may have 2 hours of boredom and 20 minutes of old crap. And then, like you said, you're ready to go back and do it again. But it's interesting because in looking at some of the places you've been, because I know you had some duties in Africa and places like that. And, places that I didn't have an opportunity to go because I was in the Army. So, it looked like you had been to some really interesting places. But as you got ready to close out your career, I know that you had, you closed it out working for the headquarters U.S. Air Force, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So what were you doing as you got ready to retire?
Well, I was my last duty assignment was as a career field manager there on the air staff in A3. And I managed all the enlisted aviators or their programs, care and feeding, those guys in training there on the air staff. So I managed load masters, boom operators, flight attendants, aerial gunners, flight engineers, so all those guys, radio operators, all those guys were under my purview for the time that I was there. I even had airborne linguists, that were underneath us, and then eventually got the sensor operators, from the UASs, or Air Force calls them. We call them RPAs, which our chief of staff said they're anything but unmanned, because of all the footprint that you have. So we call them remotely piloted aircraft,
Right,
but I was really, really involved in that. My last few years on the staff, actually got to see a program, start. I was on the ground floor for setting up that career field for the sensor operators. And my only mandate, from the chief of staff was, I want you to build something, where these guys look and act like aviators, even though they're not in a manned aircraft, but, they have no career path outside of aviation, so they, we could easily cross pollinate, guys from other weapon systems into that system, and actually got to see it, pull it up off the ground. It was one of the I think crowning moments for me, as a guy, working on a program, because typically most action officers come up to the Pentagon and start a program, leave for 5 or 6 years, go back to the Pentagon, and then still work on the program that they actually started, and it's still not finished, and they were telling me, oh man, this is huge that you got to see over 2 years. You got to see this, from the ground up, and then to where I am now sending guys to a schoolhouse. And I mean, we stood that schoolhouse up, no kidding, in less than 90 days. I was able to secure barracks, dining facility that they were just about ready to close. My boss, then Hoop Gibson, was my 2-star, and he happened to be out in San Antonio at the same time at the Air Force Education Center, and command. He was out there talking to the 4-star on some things, and the number one thing that came up was the RPA, and how we were going to how were we going to build that program, so I told him, I said, hey, they have a facility that is a no kidding flying squadron, has a skiff, has 2 skiffs. They're getting ready to turn this over to the personnel center and make it offices. And I said, they have a chow hall here that they just closed, and dormitories right next to it. I said, this place is made for us to come here and start training folks. So he was like, well, yeah, I know they got some things going on with that. I said, well, the guys down here pitched this program to me, told me, what it would take for them to, bring in some trailers, have a makeshift schoolhouse until they can actually get that building set up, and what it would take to reopen the dining facility and renovate the dormitories they were actually going to tear these buildings down, So I'm like, okay, what's the bottom line? What do you need to get this all happening? And they said, hey, we need about, 8.3 million, to get it going. And I'm standing there going, there's no way this is going to happen. So I tell my boss, I said, hey, here's what the guys are telling me. I took him to those facilities, showed him, what was going on and everything. And he was like, yeah, I don't know, Chief. I'll bring it up to the general when I go in and sit down and talk to him. But yeah, keep looking for other options. So I do my visit down there, come back to DC Monday morning. I show up a little, I show up pretty early, for me, which is about 6 in the morning. Well, General Gibson's already there, and I get to my desk and I got about 8 stickies on it to say, come down to see General Gibson. And so I'm putting my bags down. I see his exec running down the hall, and he's like, Chief, yeah, I need you in here right now. General Gibson needs to see you. And I'm like, okay. So I go down to see General Gibson, and General's like, hey, Chief, I think I'm in trouble.
Yeah.
Hey, Chief. He said, how was your trip? I said, oh, it was pretty good. I said, I'm sorry to get to eat dinner with you guys. He's like, no problem. He's like, yeah, it was kind of a whirlwind. He's like, hey, anyway, I just want to let you know you have 9.3, to get that going. And
oh, wow. Yeah.
And I'm just sitting there thinking to myself, I'm like, when the Air Force wanted to do something, or when you needed something happen, general officers could move mountains, and it was unbelievable. And in less than 90 days, we were already starting to send people from our, basic training, which was right there in Lackland, right there in San Antonio, just bus them over to Randolph, to start their RPA training, right there, which was their basic school, but it was unbelievable,
So you were able to culminate your Air Force career by establishing that training program,
Yep,
and
exactly.
leaving something behind for all those folks who came behind you.
Oh yeah, it was every time I see a young, young man or young woman, and they're wearing those badges, or they tell me what they are, I don't really say anything. It was just, like, wow,
You
that's,
just smile, right?
yeah, yep. I'm like, yeah, I was right there on the ground floor for that. It was just
Well,
awesome.
I can see why you were so excited about your career and what you were doing. But I mean, when you left the Air Force, you continued your aviation career, and I know right now you work for the FAA in Washington. Can you share just a little bit with us about what you're doing now?
Yep. When I left the Air Force, I actually went on terminal leave. I had a whole bunch of leave, almost 6 months of leave,
Mm-hmm.
that they allowed me to take, and um, um, I don't know how, either is how naive I was or, or foolish, but I was like, I'll get a job later, and I started applying for some jobs, and I only had two interviews. One was with the Joint Personnel Recovery Agency out at Fort Belvoir. And I knew a bunch of guys over there that I had flown with, and 53 as a commander was a 60 guy. I flew with him on 60s, and but I didn't pay really a whole lot of attention to the the job announcement. I was just saying I could do everything that they were asking me to do, but they were actually looking for a SEER instructor. But
Okay.
but anyway, I got another interview that same week with the FAA, and I kind of knew that the FAA was going to throw out a job offer, and so went ahead and took that. They didn't hire me over at the JPRA anyway. They wanted me to apply for some other things, and I was like, well, I'll just try this FAA thing, and got assigned to aircraft certification service, and started out there in the training branch, and been there ever since.
Yeah.
Kind of had a bunch of jobs over there, but now I'm doing evaluations on our training courses and that sort of stuff.
Yeah. So I mean, like you're an example of one of those people that, turn around and transfer their military skills right into a civilian career. And I know when I was in the Army, I saw a lot of guys struggle to do that because let's face it, if you're an infantryman or, an armor guy or a Cav scout running armor, or even an artillery guy pumping artillery rounds downrange, some of those jobs just did not, how can you say,
Right.
transfer directly over. Right. So, you were in one of those fields that seemed to work out, really well for you. So what are your plans there now? How long have you been there, and how much longer do you think you'll have?
Well, I've been at the FAA. This September will be 10 years. Believe it or not, that'll be
okay.
It'll be 10 years. And I'm, like I said, my daughter just graduated from college.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to hold on, long enough so she could get out of graduate school, and we get her set up, and then I'll reassess, but I'm having a good time, with the agency. I've learned a lot. I think my Air Force career and my military career set me up, for being an action officer at a headquarters. I was, at a numbered Air Force. I had been at the wing level, doing, different jobs as an aviator, and then at the headquarters Air Force and MAGCOM level as well. So being action officer and doing action officer work was not new to me. And absolutely my time at the Pentagon, I felt more like a lawyer than I did anything, because they make you defend every single thing that you do. And I that was a skill that I don't think I would have ever gotten, had I not had those other positions, so this, is a logical extension, to that.
Well, it's kind of interesting because, I spent the bulk of my Army career in nuclear, biological, and chemical warfare.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there are some agencies with the government that would have jobs for me, but
Mm-hmm.
it was my time as a first sergeant
Mm-hmm.
and my time as an operations NCO
Right.
was what caught the eye of folks when they hired me when I got out. So
Mm-hmm.
with those additional skills that you learned,
Mm-hmm.
so you talk about your daughter just finishing school. Um, so what are you going to do once you're ready to retire? What do you like to do? You can't work all the time. So what are some of your hobbies?
So, I'm a techie, and I piddle around the house all the time. My wife says that's what I do. So I'm always figuring out, some better way to, uh, you know, put my tools or, one of my big projects this year since we've been on COVID was to get my garage in order. And I wish I could take you out there to see it, but I had it painted. I had my floors epoxied. I got all my lawn tools and everything on the walls and shelves, in that unused dead space above.
Yeah.
I could pull both my cars in. It is everybody that walks past my house is like, man, you're so organized. I wish I could. I said, well, thanks to the military, they make you do that stuff, right? And I think I take it a little overboard. I think I'm a little OCD behind, behind some of that, but it's been.
Let me ask you this though. So, you do stuff around the house and all. So, but does your wife ever tell you, Vic, grab a fishing pole, go fishing, get out the house, man?
Oh yeah, she does tell me to. She does tell me to. When one of my friends asked me to go somewhere, and I'm like, oh no, I'd rather be here because I love my house. I try to make it. Honestly, try to make it my abode. So when I come home, I'm comfortable here. I'm down in my basement now, so my basement is set up. I have my gym equipment, a treadmill, a bike, my big screen TV, all my, so I love being at home, but I do like traveling, occasionally, I think it's kind of funny because I was on the road so much and living out of my suitcase, that I have reverted to the opposite of that individual, I love being at home and I love seeing my kids, when my son is in New Mexico now. And, even though we talk to him probably once a week on Skype or, one of the services, but it's nothing like having them and touching them and seeing them and, and having them in your presence. And that's one of the things I love most, having my in-laws here, some of my relatives to come and visit, so yeah, I'm almost the opposite of what I was before. I still got friends that live that life. That's in them, I'm like,
not anymore, right?
Not anymore. Yeah. I love being here, and there's some downsides to that, because I get into everything, so
that's why I said, I'm sure occasionally your wife's ready to chase you out of the house sometimes.
Oh yeah, yep. Her and my daughter are the opposite. They love being in the streets. So I'm like, you want to come? I'm like, nah, I think I'll stay at home. But it's been good.
Well, Vic, I have to tell you, I mean, you've had a heck of a career. I mean, 30 years to serve your country and enjoying it the way you did. So I just want to ask you before we close the show, if you could share one thought with the other veterans or just with the audience in general that you think is important, you'd like to share, what would it be?
I think, just, staying in contact with people that you care about, and that care about you. I never realized, how much guys or how much people, really cared about me, until actually I joined some of these social networks.
Yeah.
And folks I hadn't talked to in years reached out and wanted to know what I was doing, that always, hey man, what's going on with you? I got, some of my close buddies that I flew with, that we still talk and and about the old days. But it's such a good feeling, to know that, you have people who have things in common with you, not necessarily what doing what you did, but, just wearing the uniform, itself. And, anytime, you ever feel like, you don't have anybody, there is somebody out there that is willing to help, and that's a good feeling. It doesn't matter if you're Air Force. I have a lot of my colleagues at work that are, that were in the Navy, the Marines, you, Paul, in the Army, wearing that uniform in service of our country, is special, and it's always somebody out there that you can reach out to, to talk to about anything, anytime you're ever feeling in despair or just want to, listen to what other guys do or laugh about stuff,
well, you know what, you're absolutely right. And I mean, that's a very good thought. And Vic, I got to tell you, I mean, I really appreciate you coming on the show tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Oh yeah, it's been great. Talking to somebody that spent 30 years serving their country. It's definitely something a little unusual in most cases. But
oh yeah,
I want to thank you for coming on the show and being with us tonight.
Thank you, Paul.
And I'm sure we'll be running into you, or at least I know I will.
Oh yeah,
some other points.
Oh yeah.
And for those of you that are watching the show, we want to thank Victor for coming on tonight, and we appreciate his service to the country. And for the rest of you out there, and I want to pass on this little bit of info for our veterans and our audience. Don't forget that this coming Monday is Memorial Day. And there's a lot of information there you see on the screen at the VA.gov cemetery history site that has a lot of information about our VA cemeteries that are open on Memorial Day. And something I just want to share with the audience before we go. For those of you that ever been to Arlington or been to a VA cemetery, have you ever noticed those coins that are sitting on the headstones and wondered why they're there? You see a menagerie of coins, pennies, nickels, dimes, and quarters. Well, let me kind of decode that for you real quick before we go. So if you see those coins, please leave them in place. Leave them there. They're there for a reason. And the reason why they're there is if someone leaves a penny, that means that they just visited that service member's headstone and said hello and paid their respects. If you find a nickel, it signifies that the visitor attended training or boot camp with that fallen veteran. So they knew that person and attended training with them. When you see a 10-cent coin, it means that the person visiting served alongside that fallen veteran in some capacity. During their career, they served together with that person who's now interred at the VA cemetery. And finally, if you see a 25-cent piece, that quarter means the visitor was there when that veteran passed away on the battlefield or when they passed away. So please, just as a matter of respect and a matter of information, please take the time if you get a chance to visit one of the VA cemeteries this Memorial Day. And remember, if you see those coins, they have a meaning. So please leave them in place. We want to thank you for spending time with us on our show. You've been listening to the WGSN-DB Going Solo Network Veterans Corner on the Going Solo Network. I want to thank you for spending time with us tonight and listening to Vic share his story, and we hope to see you on our next show. Thank you.